Welcome back to the Archispeak podcast. This week, Cormac, this is becoming a theme. We're having more and more guests on the show.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird, but we have Jessica Orlando, and you are, you're going to give us your title and everything, but you're at Perkins and Will in Southern California, but you're also really involved in the local AIA Pasadena Foothill chapter. And we're going to be talking about the recent fire devastation that happened in the Altadena area of Southern California. And there was also the Palisades fire. There's a lot, I think, of information that the AIA wants to share for people who are being forced to rebuild, but then all architects who are helping make that happen, how maybe architects can get more involved in what's going on, and maybe what some of the policy changes have been because of the state of emergency that it's been in. And so I would love it if you would give us kind of a quick overview of where you're coming from and what you've been seeing for the last few months.
Thanks so much for having me. As you mentioned, I'm with the AIA Pasadena and Foothill chapter. This year, I'm the vice president-elect. And unfortunately, our president actually was directly impacted and lost his home in the fire. And that's part of the reason why I felt it was necessary for me to really step in and kind of take ownership of our wildfire response. And so here I am, managing a couple hundred volunteers and various initiatives that we've implemented over the last 3 months or so. It's been absolutely a privilege working with all the folks that we have on board, and we have a lot going on. So I think first and foremost, the Ask an Architect program has gotten a lot of really great coverage, and I think it's really where we've been able to make the most impact. We've actually, as of today, we've matched about 210 community members with licensed California architects. And the purpose of that program is really to just give guidance and information to folks who are trying to navigate this process. It's really just overwhelming. For so many people, thousands of homes were lost in Altadena and even beyond that in the Palisades. And most of these people have never had the opportunity to work with an architect or have been confronted with the reality of having to build anything. And so really what we're here to do is to provide this free service to help provide just that guidance, but also that confidence so that folks can feel more comfortable with how they make their decisions and how to move forward. So we know that not everyone will be able to stay and rebuild. We're helping folks navigate questions about insurance, legal questions. We're just giving them as many resources as we can to help make those critical decisions. And then once they do decide to rebuild, connecting them with reputable professionals that they can work with, whether they're architects or contractors or other design professionals. So we're seeing that that's really been just a critical connector, trying to bring all of the information to the people so that they know how best to move forward in their particular situation. So that's been a huge focus for us. Another focus has been about educating the public about the rebuilding process. And so we've done multiple in-person events as well as virtual webinars, really just trying to share information about what the process of rebuilding looks like, who are all the players that are involved, how they can engage with that, bring information to the table. We actually just had a really great webinar in partnership with LA County Public Works this past Saturday about how to engage with a design professional. So what to bring to the table, what to expect, but also what you should get from your design professional and what with your design team so that, we really want to avoid folks getting taken advantage of in this situation as well. So just providing them that kind of empowerment and education as they move forward with the rebuilding process. So those are really two of the biggest things we focus on. You did mention changes in policy as well. So we are also focused on kind of advocacy efforts and connecting with our local government officials, just trying to stay apprised of everything that's changing. It's a very quickly changing landscape, and I can talk a little bit more about some of those specific changes too. But yeah, there's a lot going on, and we know that there continues to be many things going on as well that we're trying to stay on top of. So those are kind of the big areas that we focused on so far.
So let me ask you, how has the public's reception of all of this outreach and support from the architecture community been?
I think we've gotten great feedback from both sides of the table. So right now we have about 150 volunteer architects who we are matching with community members. I think for them, you may have seen some of the directories or lists that came out right after the fires of architects saying, hey, we want to help. We want to do something to support our community. This has been a tangible way for them to contribute directly, and they're working directly with a community member one-on-one. So I think it's rewarding for architects because, so many of us just wanted to help in some way, provide that expertise where we can. And then on the flip side, we're hearing very positive things from the community as well. I think so many of them, as I mentioned, they're overwhelmed. They don't feel like there's anyone who's advocating for them. They're getting a lot of sales pitches. They're getting a lot of folks coming to them who want to make money. So I think for us to be a nonprofit organization that is really there to be an unbiased resource, I think it's refreshing for them, and it just gives them a lot of confidence that they're getting accurate information. So I think on both ends, it's been very positive.
Can you kind of paint a picture of what the process has been like? And maybe I don't know if you guys have done any research into other locations in California, like, there's been the Paradise Fire, Santa Rosa. There's been, obviously, California. This is a plague of being in California in some respects. But it's like there's obviously lessons learned as this has happened over the years. What have you been able to kind of apply to this situation from those previous situations as far as what you're able to then translate to the homeowners as far as what to expect when it comes time to make that decision to rebuild and what's possible and things like that?
Absolutely. So one of the first things we did actually right after we started mobilizing was we organized a session with AIA Maui to talk about the Lahaina fires. And we had a great session. It's recorded and on our YouTube channel, just talking about where they were, about two plus years after the fact. I think one of the biggest lessons or just, pieces of information that we could share just amongst our own community, but also with the public is the time that it takes to rebuild. I think that just being realistic about the expectation is really important, just so that they going in eyes open, kind of know what's going to happen is really important. I think one of the challenges is that these fires hit a major metropolitan area. Luckily we are connected with AIA California, which is our umbrella organization. There are 21 AIA chapters in California. And so they have resources and people that we can connect with. And so we've talked with a lot of them about, like you said, the Woolsey Fire, the Palisades, or the Paradise Fire. So we've gotten some of those lessons learned, but this situation is so different because the context is so different. So much of the urban area burned as opposed to a much more rural context. So I think as much as we can learn from kind of the process and the implementation that happened after those fires, it's still fundamentally very different too, just because of the context. So we're trying to learn as much as we can, but also understand that things like changing permit processes is very different in a place like LA County versus, a small locality in Northern California.
So when it comes to like those kind of permit process changes, can you just talk a little bit about what happened right after the fire and what the goals were with that? And then maybe you can speak toward at least the short-term reality of that, whether it's been positive or negative.
Yeah, so I think that there's been, we're living in a housing crisis here in Southern California, right? So there's this immediate pressure for housing, and then we just lost, tens of thousands of homes, right? So it's basically this pressure cooker, and I think partially because of that, there's been this immense focus on just how do we rebuild back as quickly as possible, because we need these housing units to be online, and we don't want people to leave. Right? There are people who they're now sitting on this property that they can't occupy. How do we prevent them from going to Arizona or going to another state or another city? So I think that the first couple months really have been focused on how do we just remove barriers to rebuilding. And I'll speak for myself. I don't want to speak for necessarily our chapter, the organization, but I think some of the regulations that were rolled back were a little concerning. Things like sustainability requirements, for like photovoltaic panels and things like that. We understand that there are costs and, timelines that are associated with those, but this situation is facilitated by climate change, right? So we don't necessarily want to give up on those things that are trying to combat the issue that's creating, this problem. So there are things like that are a little challenging. But then on the flip side, in terms of permit streamlining, we're now just starting to see some changes that are occurring within the city of LA and the county of LA to try and just acknowledge that the previous processes that took months and months to approve a set of drawings for building, that's not going to work, right? We have to get creative and we have to change the way we've been doing things. And so I think we're headed in the right direction to try and get there and make sure that we meet the demand.
So you'd started to touch on the concerns you had about the fast tracking of the permitting and things like that. And so forgive the naive question from the East Coaster here, but are they looking at ways of also potentially like modifying the building codes, making more resilient housing and things like that, that are either adding to or kind of like slowing down any of that process? Or is it just kind of like everything's flooding at once?
I think right now it's all just about speed, just trying to make it happen faster. And that is a concern for our community, I think, which is that we're going to go back and rebuild in these places that just burned, right? We don't necessarily want to create the same problem that we just had. So, we want to also advocate for smart rebuilding as well, not just fast rebuilding. And so I think that's definitely part of the conversation we're trying to have now.
Yeah, I was just going to add in, like, we all saw the pictures of like the one house that didn't burn, right? And there was all these analyses going on of, but I mean, talking about building smart, right? Like it's materials, it's separation, it's defensible space, it's a lot of things. Yeah. And to your point, like a lot of times, like putting yourself in the shoes of the homeowner, they want to get back what they just lost. And so there's this huge pressure put on the design professionals and the permitting agencies. And I'm sure the permitting agencies are like, yeah, whatever makes our lives easier, because all of a sudden it's an overwhelming amount of work to just say, well, let's just build what we lost. Let's just build the exact same thing. Right. And like there's like the aesthetic part of it, right? Which is just like the feeling of home for these people who, like you said, didn't have to, they were probably never going to have to deal with an architect, right? Or a builder. Right. And so they're in this situation of like, I just want what I lost. Like that's the thing I want. And so there's that pressure, but at the same time, it's like, well, we also all saw what happened because of, or 50s construction techniques and exposed attic vents and like all of these things that embers catch under the eaves or in the gutters or like whatever the things are, and timber frame construction, right? So light frame wood construction. So it's like we saw this with the Paradise Fires too. It's like the same thing. It's like, well, let's just go back in and build the exact same thing, and it seems like there's such a huge incentive to even if you could keep it looking a certain way, but replacing that with a material that is way more fire resistant would just be a super easy win there. But are there any requirements on anything like that being put into place for these fast track kind of permit approvals to build again?
Right now, the only requirements that kind of go above and beyond code minimum are in the high fire severity zones. So CAL FIRE, they issue plans that kind of dictate where these zones exist. And they just reissued plans at the end of March after the fires that considered what happened with both the Palisades and the Eaton fire. I think we were all a little surprised that they actually did not expand as far as we thought they might, given the current events. I think that was a little surprising, but the upside is that this can drive cost, right? That's always the downside, is that to go above code minimum, you are going to invest more, cost in the rebuild. I think, though, because of the concerns of the community about this happening again at a future date, I think we're just actually hearing more organic interest from community members. So they're just saying, okay, we're going to go build back, but I want to make sure that it's going to be something that is more resilient. And so just that voluntary action, I think, is really powerful because people are more aware of it now. And so we're definitely encouraging that. We partnered with the USGBC California on their Resilient Rebuilding Guide. They definitely took most of the effort on that with ARIP, and it's a really fantastic resource. So we're pointing people to that. And it's just, I think for us, it's a lot of it is about education, right? So how can we just share that information and make sure that people are aware that there are relatively simple and they do cost something, but the overall cost is not really onerous. And so we think it's worthwhile for them to consider. So we're definitely trying to kind of share that message.
I'm curious from like a homeowner's point of view then, is when they're coming in to talk to architects, can you talk about what some of the again, kind of reframing it as like, I just want back what I just lost kind of a thing. But there's potential, I think, because things have changed, right, since their homes were originally built for the most part, right? Of course, there are some that were just, actually, I have an architect friend who lost his house in Pasadena or Altadena, that it was like maybe 2 years old. Like it was literally brand new, right? So like what I'm talking about maybe doesn't apply to his family's home, but others who were built a long time ago. Can you talk about what some of the changes have been that people may not know about, so that when they come and do talk to an architect, what are the kinds of things that architects are telling them that they can do to their property?
For sure, yeah. Well, and this is part of what I tell architects who are very concerned about just going back and rebuilding, which is that, many of the structures that burned were 60 to 100 years old, right? They were, there were no building codes for some of those structures that burned, that they were sold. And the other thing to keep in mind too is that because of the age of the neighborhoods, there was just a lot of vegetative fuel as well. A lot of brush, a lot of plants right up against houses. So I mean, we know that part of the management is just about landscape too. So I think that's an important thing to consider. But there are relatively easy or cost-effective ways to manage. You mentioned a few of them already, which is just checking your e-vents, checking what your roof is made out of, making sure it's a Class A fireproof material. We actually had some friends who they did not lose their home. They had a relatively new roof on their home, and they think that's part of the reason why their house didn't burn was they had no e-vents, they had no gutters, and they had a relatively new roof. So, there are certain things that we know that if you focus on those elements, that, it can give you much more confidence about the resilience of your home. So, we hope we can at least sell that message a little strongly, just to give people that information.
And so architects are, I know you've said this, but I mean, architects are basically sitting down with them and like educating them and walking them through. I mean, the same thing as I'm a registered Florida architect. And when we have hurricanes and things like that, we got to go through the same process of it's just like, well, you can't build what you have or what you had, but you can. And then just educating them on like components and cladding and what it means with the new codes and things like that. And it always feels like we're the bearer of bad news, that it's going to slow it down or it's going to drive up cost or things like that. But it's being able to deliver the hard news in a softer way to kind of at least inform them that, what you're going to get is going to be better. It is going to.
Absolutely. And I think one thing that's been very positive for us is that amidst this tragedy, right? I mean, this is absolutely a tragedy. There are still people who are seeing the silver lining, which is I never would have gotten to envision a new home for myself. And I get to go through that process and work with someone and think about what that could be, and so they are seeing it as an opportunity, which I mean, it's very fulfilling for us as architects to see that you're coming out of this immensely difficult situation, and then we can help guide those people through a process that is aspirational still. So I do hope we can also focus on that, that for the folks who are staying and rebuilding, that they do get this opportunity. And while they might not get exactly what they had, to your point, Evan, I mean, wanting that sense of home and that sense of place, I think is, kind of the natural inclination, but also that the flip side of it is that you do get to rethink what home is to you, what that means to you, and create it for yourself. So we are kind of trying to sell that message as well, which is that we are here to be your partner in that aspirational process, and that we're here to facilitate that.
I think one of the big messages that, and people don't think about this unless they maybe have to, or maybe they're told, but it's like, you bought a place and then you fit your life into that place, right? And this is now an opportunity to say, now we're going to make the place fit our life, and that could be a very different thing.
Exactly.
And that's what architects are so good at. So can you give us an idea of what the timelines are kind of like, ballpark? Because I mean, Altadena is an unincorporated area, is that correct? So that's why you're talking about having to deal with the county of LA for all of the permitting. I've done LA County projects, not simple. the whole lots of agency approvals, a little bit complex to navigate. And so assuming like extra time kind of gets built into that because of that complexity. But can you kind of talk about what the timelines generally are for approvals, but also building? Like, what are you just seeing right now? Like if you were just to give us an idea.
For sure. So I will say it's
Yeah.
early days. So the first set of plans just got approved this week. So the first permit
Oh
was
my
pulled this
gosh.
week.
Wow.
So it's still pretty early. But one thing that is an incredible commitment that we are waiting to see how it plays out is that the county has committed to a 2-week review period for every plan check submittal and a 1-week turnaround time for back check submittals. Which is if you have done work in the county before the fires, it was usually 6 to 8
I
months.
was going to say.
So
How
I
did
think
they do that then? Where did that
they
time go? How did they cut that much out of it? I don't understand how they did that.
Yeah. So part of what's happening is that they are creating 2 separate streams. So everything else that's happening in LA County keeps going on its normal pathway, but anything that's in the rebuild zones will be entered into a separate queue. And so then that queue is obviously differently resourced than everything else that's happening. So they've said we're going to prioritize this and throw all of our resources into that queue. So
Are they hiring like more reviewers? I mean,
we have not heard that. Yeah. So we are all
AI.
interested to see just how the implementation goes. Well, so this is one thing that is being talked about right now. A big one that is happening. So the city of LA actually just last week, they introduced a pilot program for self-certification. So that would allow a licensed architect and or structural engineer to essentially plan check their own drawings. There are obviously a lot of considerations around how that might work and how long it will take to implement a program like that. But the county of LA is also planning to introduce a motion this coming week for the same. So they are looking for creative solutions to how to expedite the plan check process, which I think we all as professionals appreciate. I think we are just, the proof is going to be in the pudding a little bit, and we're going to see how it goes as time progresses.
But that just totally makes sense too, right? In a situation like this where you're a licensed professional and you have insurance, you have like these things are in place for a reason, and people like your not only your reputation, your business, there's so many things tied to this being done well and being done right that it's not like people are going to take this lightly, right? Like the professionals are going to step up.
Right.
I mean, they would be risking their license, and of course, obviously, they're going to do it right because this is their life. So,
I think the biggest challenge that I'm aware of is insurance. So most premiums will likely go up if folks are self-certifying plans, just because there is additional liability. So that is
there
one
really
thing,
additional
one
liability?
consideration.
I mean, I get it, like on paper maybe, but in reality, like building officials aren't licensed, right? Like I get it that it's an extra set of of like red tape that you have to go through, and then therefore I'm using air quotes, right? Like there's more. Yeah, there's another step there of like checks and balances, but at the same time, like that seems to me like that should be a conversation that is had with the agencies and with the professionals, and not just something that's dictated through insurance companies, right?
So many things to think about and talk about on that one,
right?
Yeah, that's a whole other can of worms.
So let me ask. Because now, obviously, just in the current climate that we are living in, we have clients that their work is either slowing down or, possibly going on hold because of skyrocketing material costs or the lack of availability of materials. How is the rebuild dealing with and facing that challenge as well?
Yeah, it is a huge concern. And I think one of the most interesting things that we're starting to see is that groups are coalitions to do things like bulk buying. So if they kind of have a higher purchasing power coming together as a block or as a neighborhood or under one kind of development group, then they have a little more priority as opposed to a single family homeowner, that they can get better pricing for things, if they're bulk buying rather than, again, as, kind of a single plot, just trying to build a single home. So we're seeing some creative ideas around that. But I think one big concern is around labor as well. Just the labor market here, I'm sure that we're going to see an influx of folks coming here to work here. But of course, that's going to put more pressure on our housing market as well. So we kind of reinforce some of the existing problems that are already going on. There's a lot of talk about prefabrication or modular as well. And we've been talking with a few fabricators who are actively building factories in the LA area right now to try and meet the demand that's coming in. Some folks are looking at options like, okay, if there's a modular ADU that I can install on my property right now, I can get it installed in 6 months, live in it, and then go back and rebuild a primary structure. You're now allowed to do that in LA County. They allow the ADU to come before the primary structure. So there are some positive things like that just through innovation and new partnerships, new typologies that I think are going to meet some of those needs. But I think at a certain point, right, tariffs on lumber, tariffs on aluminum, those things are just going to become a reality. So
I'm curious. I thought I heard something, so correct me if I'm wrong, about building back more square footage than what was lost without any kind of additional fees. I don't know if you
review,
if you could explain that.
Absolutely. So both the City of LA and County of LA have provisions that they call like for like with 110%. Okay. So they both allow an expansion kind of within that 10%, but essentially the baseline that's set is through government documents, so through county assessor records, through permit or plan check records. So that sets your baseline, and then you can add 10% square footage on top of that. The City of LA and the County of LA are slightly different in terms of how they define bulk or height. LA County is a little more restrictive than City of LA right now. But then on the flip side, County of LA has allowed for a provision, especially because they have so many smaller homes, where they say you can add the 10% or 200 square feet. So any home that was less than 2,000 square feet, they can just claim the extra 200 square feet. So there's a lot of nuance to it, but yes, but essentially there's some wiggle room within the like for like rebuild that will not trigger additional review or additional fees or anything.
Does that then play into property taxes as well? That just a quick, yeah. Okay.
It does, yeah. So the way that the property taxes are working is that any additional square footage that is built over what you are currently assessed at, that will get updated at the new tax base. But everything, so if you had a 1,200 square foot home, for example, and you build back a 1,400 square foot home, only that extra 200 square feet will get assessed at the current tax base. Everything else will stay at the tax base that it was previously at.
So let me ask this, because it seems interestingly counterintuitive. Some of the problems that they had, Evan, you were talking about this, was the building separations and things like that. So now, you're allowed to build, 10% more, and without triggering a review. How is that helping? Try to figure out how to phrase this without just, I don't know.
I think I get what you're going for. Yeah, which is that I think we acknowledge that much of the catastrophe was fueled by the fact that homes were very close together, that they were not compliant with modern setbacks and things like that. And unfortunately, those things will remain. So essentially, where your home was previously, you can build it back where it was. If you're going to do something like add an ADU, you didn't have an ADU before, the ADU will have to comply with modern setbacks, right? So if there's anything you're adding or changing, you're going to have to comply with it. But essentially, the like for like rebuild allows you to rebuild your home substantially where it was.
Yeah, and I guess that's why I was a little flabbergasted when I was trying to ask that question, because I was like, something's not mentally computing here that you're able to basically build like for like and potentially increase by 10%.
Right.
But yet there's still the problem with the way that things are zoned, the setbacks and things like that are automatically somewhat kind of putting you right back in the same situation you were. Yes, you are building with better materials, with the fire resistant materials and such, but there's just so much. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Sure. Yeah.
Jessica.
No, and I think we would agree. Yeah. I mean, I think this is one of those areas where trying to facilitate the rebuilding process, they don't want to open that can of worms, right? Because one of the challenges is that there are lots in Altadena, especially, that are so narrow that if you were to, enforce modern setbacks, you would not, you couldn't build a home on it. There are lots that are only 35 feet wide. Like, you couldn't meet modern planning code. So, yeah.
Go ahead, Evan.
Well, I have a question kind of about the architectural community. So is there obviously you're providing resources to architects through the chapter there, and there's got to be some kind of dialogue happening, it sounds like, to get everybody up to date so that the right information's going out to homeowners when they're being met with, being paired up with an architect, but also then it's like, okay, take the ball and run with it. And you've got to have the right information going out so that we're not running in circles.
Correct.
But I'm also curious, like, after that, are architects getting together and are they talking shop with each other? Because, man, there's way more work than there's architects, I would imagine, to do the work, right? And so this isn't going to be a situation that we see in so many firms today where it's like everything's a secret, everything's a differentiator for us, and it's our intellectual property. It seems to me like this is a huge opportunity to come together as an industry or a profession, however you want to say that, so that the information is being shared between professionals as well who are providing these services and making recommendations. I'm just curious if you see that happening.
For sure. Yeah. It's very informal right now, but it is definitely happening. There's actually a Slack that was formed that was kind of just LA architects for rebuilding. I think it kind of slowed down a little bit more recently, but especially in the first 2 months or so after the fires, it was just a huge repository of everyone dumping all the information they could all in one place. That has actually started to be approximated a little bit within our Ask an Architect group. So as I mentioned, we've got about 150 architects from all over California. The only requirement we have is that they are licensed in the state of California. We actually have one person who's in Nevada and one person who's in another state, I can't remember. But just as long as they hold a license in California, they can participate in the program. And we have just a Microsoft Teams chat where we are constantly updating each other on all of the new motions that the county is introducing, new legislation at the state level that's coming out, new interpretations that we're getting from the one-stop shop on certain code requirements. So I think it happens informally right now, which is really great. And part of it is just because the speed is so quick. But I would hope that as we continue to move forward, we're seeing the pace of that change kind of slow down. I would hope that we can formalize that a little better, make sure that we're taking all of these changes that are happening and getting those out to not only our membership, but to the community at large. One of the events we're planning right now actually it's a kind of a legally focused program for architects about all of the changes that have happened. So starting with offering pro bono services, just, what to be aware of, the pitfalls to watch out for, making sure that they have access to contracts, to use if they're going to provide pro bono services. Then looking at things like self-certification, what kind of insurance are you going to need to have? What kind of liability protection do you need to have? So trying to consider in this changing landscape, and when you're working with a client that you've never really had the chance to work with before, who's in this situation, just all of the legal ramifications of that. So we're trying to start to digest those topics into programs that we can then push out to the public as well. So I think it's a little bit of both. There's some of that informal kind of just dynamic discussion happening, and then also how can we actually chat and get it into a useful format.
A great thing for the chapter, or at least maybe the state chapter, right? Because this is going to apply to other locations. It's inevitable. Right. But also, like, there's no organizing body that seems to want to touch this kind of a thing, and it seems like it's such a huge opportunity for our profession to take advantage of. I mean, obviously it's a tragedy, but also that seems to be the only way anything gets done. Like, things get updated. It seems like it's a great place or a great time for that to happen. And so obviously there's, like you said, the first set of permits just got approved. And so there's going to be more phases. There's going to be new things learned all along all of those different phases. And there's got to be a way, like you said, like at least you have a Slack or a Teams, like to help get that out. But there's different people at different levels of technological, like what they're willing to check in on, like you said, like it's kind of tapering off as far as like the participation in those things. But because nobody needs like another thing to do, I get it. But at the same time, it's like there needs to be some kind of platform that makes this. I mean, this is what the internet's for. Like that is literally what it's for, is disseminating this kind of information and pulling it all together. So I would hope that's happening, and maybe if there aren't architects who are dealing with clients in the rebuild effort and all of that kind of stuff specifically, but still want to participate in this, maybe that's an opportunity, like, to bring to our profession in that way to come and help organize and get people all on the same page. So because like some of this information is going to have an expiration date, right? And so it's like, okay, that doesn't apply anymore. What does apply? And keeping everybody up to date seems like it's a huge job, like no doubt about it, right?
Yeah. We've essentially just kind of created our own brain trust right now through our volunteers.
Grassroots.
You know, everyone's just kind of keeping their ear to the ground, and you know, we're just kind of documenting it all together. And I mean, to your point, the way that we're handling it now is we have a set of training documents for our volunteers. So we have folks who every 2 to 3 weeks are updating those documents regularly, inputting all the new information, and then it gets pushed out to our volunteers. So I mean, we are kind of doing that, but it's just, again, sort of on an informal level.
Yeah, so. I'm just going to throw it out there. Like if you're listening to this and you're not there, and you're not a California architect, and but you're still interested in helping, I think there are other opportunities to help. And so I would hope that you would reach out to Jessica and ask. But I mean, like, we need a Wikipedia for architects for this, right? And we need an office hours for architects for this, where it's like people come together and swap the latest information and the solutions and the real world things that are happening, so that everybody has the opportunity to stay up to date, but be on the same page and not be dealing with old information. So anyway, that's my soapbox. I would hope that we could pull that together.
No, it's a good one. Yeah. Well, and I will say at the national level, AIA is working on, they're creating sort of more collated resilience resources. So I know that we've kind of been interfacing with them on, you know, all the things that we've collected, because there are a million things out there right now, which is great, but also overwhelming. And so they are trying to create a more curated and accessible set of materials that is in a web-based tool. So they are working on something to that end right now, but that is meant to be more broad, right? It's like, national. Okay, if you're designing for a hurricane, if you're you know, so at that level, it's kind of trying to provide a set of resources at that 30,000 foot view. But I definitely agree with you on the, you know, kind of more crisis specific resources, right? Because we're talking with the folks in Colorado who went through wildfires, and the folks in Northern California, the folks in Hawaii, you know, because we all are dealing with the same things, you know, in various timescales. So if we had a repository that was just about managing wildfires, you know, that'd be amazing.
It would be kind of a thankless job, but at the same time, like so valuable, so valuable. Yeah.
For sure.
Well, I feel like we've touched on almost everything. Is there anything else that you want to get the word out about to the architects in Southern California and beyond that would be useful for them? Like, where can they go to find out more? Where can they go to connect with you? Or if there's any other topics that you think are useful? Yeah, our website is the best place to go. We have both kind of an architect focus page and a homeowner focus page. So depending on who you are, we've got resources focused for both of those. Our email is wildfiresupport@aiapf.org. So if you email that email, it'll go to me and our executive director, and we'll make sure it gets routed where it needs to go. And that same goes if you want to volunteer with us. You know, I mentioned a lot of our initiatives, but we've also got a bunch of other things going on, and even just supporting all of these initiatives, like who creates the graphics and the flyers, and who helps us to get it out on social media, and all of those other things. So really, if you have any skill set and interest, we're looking for help, and we'd love to have you. Nice.
So.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And we'll put links to those 2 web pages, put that email address in our show notes for this, so that people don't have to remember that, or, you know, you just pull up the show notes and you can click on those links and get to those things quickly. Good luck. This is a huge thing.
Perfect.
And thank you so much for coming on the show
Thank
to
you.
share what's going on and the latest information. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.